How did your son react when he found out women work through period pain every month? Friday afternoon, I'm on the couch with a heating pad. My 9-year-old son Finn comes home from school. He sees the heating pad. He says, "Mom, what's wrong?" I say, "Nothing serious." I say, "It's just cramps." He says, "From what?" I say, "From my period." He knows about periods. We talked about it when his sister got hers. He says, "Does it hurt?" I say, "Yes, a bit today." He says, "Like how much?" I say, "Like a 5 or 6 today." He says, "Out of 10?" I say, "Yes." He sits on the floor next to the couch. He says, "Do you always get this?" I say, "Most months, yes." He says, "And you still went to work this morning?" I say, "Yes." He thinks about that. He says, "With a 5 or 6?" I say, "Yes." He says, "And then you picked me up?" I say, "Yes." He looks at the heating pad. He says, "How long does it last?" I say, "For me, usually the first 2 days." He does the math. He says, "So 24 days a year you're in pain like this and still doing everything?" I say, "Roughly, yes." He looks at my husband, who's in the kitchen making dinner. He watches him for a second. He says, "Dad?" He looks back at my husband. He says, "So dinner?" My husband says, "Yes." Finn nods very slowly. He says, "Okay." He stands up. He goes to the kitchen. He says, "What can I help with?" My husband says, "The salad." Finn makes the salad. He makes it carefully. He cuts everything into even pieces. He carries it to the table. He comes back to me. He says, "Is there anything you need?" I say, "I'm okay, baby." He says, "Water?" I say, "Actually, yes." He brings water. He sits back on the floor. He says, "Mom." I say, "Yeah." He says, "I missed school once for a stomachache that was like a 3. I say, "I remember." He says, "And you brought me soup and let me watch TV all day." I say, "Yes." He is quiet. He says, "You do that every month and still go to work." I say, "It's manageable. Most months." He says, "But not all months." I say, "Some months are harder." He says, "What do you do on the harder months?" I say, "I just get through it." He says, "By yourself?" I say, "Usually, yes." He is quiet again. He says, "That's not right." I say, "Finn." He says, "No, it's not." He says, "If I had a 3, you made soup." He says, "You have a 5 and made dinner for 2 months before Dad started making it tonight." My husband has heard all of this from the kitchen. He comes to the doorway. He says, "I hear you, Finn." Finn looks at him. He says, "I'm not trying to be mean." He says, "I just want to understand." My husband says, "I know." He says, "You're right." He says, "I should pay more attention." Finn looks at me. He says, "Is there something that helps besides the heating pad?" I say, "Sleep." He says, "Then you should sleep now." I say, "Dinner is almost." He says, "I'll finish the salad." He looks at my husband. He says, "We've got it." My husband looks at Finn. He says, "Yeah." He says, "We've got it." I look at my 9-year-old son, who came home from school, and within 10 minutes restructured dinner, got me water, and built a low-key case for more support, without once raising his voice or making it an argument. He just noticed. He just sat on the floor and noticed. I go to sleep. They finish dinner. Finn saves me a plate. He covers it with a towel so it doesn't dry out. He wrote "Mom" on the towel so nobody eats it. My husband finds it later and shows me. I eat it cold. It's the best dinner I've had in months. All hail Finn, age 9, floor sitter, towel labeler. He compared his 3 to my 5 and decided the math wasn't right.